You're listening to Tapestry, a podcast by a music lover for music lovers. I'm your host, Kelly. Music is a thread that weaves a course throughout our lives. Join me on a journey to unravel that thread and bring you the stories behind what inspires musicians to create. Side note, Tapestry is an uncensored podcast. Don't say I didn't warn you. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 42 of Tapestry, where today I had an extremely informative conversation with Kelli Rae Tubbs, who actually just was announced as the 2020 recipient of the Paul Charosh Independent Scholar Fellowship. We weren't allowed to announce that at the time of the interview, so in this interview, we discussed her journey, which began with a curiosity about her family tree, but ultimately led her down a path towards researching the history of drums, to how she became a band leader and collector of late 19th century and early 20th century instruments, on how her philosophy of saying yes has shaped her career as a professional percussionist, her involvement in the Hit Like a Girl contest, and much, much more. The first piece I'm going to play by her is her contribution to a track called Calcutta Rodeo, and then the track you'll hear at the end is a little bit of The Downfall of Paris. Today I have with me Kelli Rae Tubbs, and honestly, I could try to introduce you, but Kelly to Kelly, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself because you have a giant list of things that you could add as descriptors to you as a musician and as a career. So why don't you, in your own terms, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you would describe what it is that you do.
Oh wow, that's you're making me work so early in this interview. That's a really hard question. I oftentimes have a hard time describing to myself what it is that I do, but what it is that I can do, for sure, is I'm a musician. I'm a drummer and percussionist. I'm a singer sometimes. I've been singing with drumming ever since I was in high school. So lending leader or backing vocals to that. I've been a band leader of a 1920s dance orchestra, like the early jazz bands. I sometimes compose. I am busy with grant projects, which have opened up my world of music considerably. It's been a really wonderful honor to be awarded grants like that and to feel the support of arts groups who want to support people in their journey and to help propel them forward. A perpetual student, that's a really great way to describe me. I am happiest when I am learning. It doesn't really matter what I'm learning. As long as it's something.
Right, and the reason I was saying that it's hard to describe you as a person who has only kind of met you over the internet is just because you do have such a humongous resume of things that you're always keeping yourself busy with. That's why I wanted to leave it up to you.
Yeah, and I think in the most recent years, I've kind of come to have a little bit of a reputation as a historian of drumming topics. So with several of the grant projects that I've done, I've been able to create a series of videos that covers the very earliest parts of drum set history. And I'm in the process of writing a book with Daniel Glass, who is an amazing drumming historian himself. So it's I have these fun opportunities that come up and unexpectedly, and I had decided about 4 years ago that my job, the real important part of my job, is just to say yes. So it doesn't matter what opportunity comes up. The answer is yes. Okay. and that's it. And then cool things happen when I do. So that a lot of the things that have come up to me, a lot of the opportunities that have come to me, I have not been prepared to do at all.
Yeah.
and I say yes, and then I learn how to be prepared for that opportunity. And for example, I was invited by Drum Talk TV, which is a drumming social media channel and website. I was invited to be a correspondent and to go interview people, drummers and companies, and of course, the only answer in my philosophy, the only answer was yes. But it took me a week and talking to several different people to get myself to a place where yes was an answer I was comfortably uncomfortable with.
Fair, yeah.
So, and it turned out just fine, right? As I figured it would, and that's why the answer is yes. But yeah, it was set me ill at ease for a little while, for sure.
Well, I guess that's a good place to mention, and I do like to do this in my interviews too, but it's a good place to mention, I guess, how this happened, which was our interview started with my Meinl cymbal being broken and me seeking help for it online. And so if anyone listening out there has seen the Facebook ads for Drummer Girls United, that was the group that I met you through. And I just found that interesting because it's like in your philosophy of always saying yes, I didn't go to that group to find guests for my podcast. I really went to that group to find, be empowered by other women playing drums as a drummer myself, but then also learning how to fix my stuff that I broke because it costs like $170 and I don't want to throw that away. So when you so politely responded to my post and then video chatted with me and kind of walked me through how to fix it, I just kind of mentioned, hey, you have a really interesting background, let's talk. And so thankfully you didn't say no, you said yes, and here we are.
The only answer is yes.
The only
That's
answer
exactly
is yes.
Right.
But I have to admit, it was a little intimidating, not like doing the research on you because you have so much stuff out there, but it's just the breadth of who you are as a musician and a person. It was like, holy crap, how do I focus in on any one thing? And I'm not sure if I can. So I guess let me walk you back through your own history and kind of figure out how you arrived here. I think you mentioned on your website you knew you wanted to be a musician at like age 3 or something. So
correct. Yeah.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about how your musical journey started?
Wow. Yeah. I was 3.5 years old and the Beatles were very popular at that time. And I had a brother, the older of my 2 brothers enjoyed music. And he loved listening. He loved bringing me in to listen with him. And so he and I would sing along with his Beatles records. He won in a contest, a local radio contest. He won a copy of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and others. And we would just sing the harmonies for that. So, that's where my singing comes in. I've been doing that longer than anything else. And at 3.5, I decided I just simply had to be a part of the Beatles. But I hadn't really seen them. I only knew singing, and so I wanted to be just singing with the Beatles. I didn't want to take anybody's place. I just wanted to be added, kind of like the 5th Beatle, Billy Preston, right? Or George Martin. I was actually the original 5th Beatle because I came in before Billy Preston.
That's a tall order.
Yeah, it is. It is, but I just always knew, and I'm not really sure why, but there was it has been unwavering. I just have to do this.
Now, you have, like you said, kind of become known for, I guess, being a music historian, and I think it's cool that your career trajectory has kind of become little bits and pieces of history and music and, being a clinician and a band leader and all these things. But did you always feel a draw to the historical part of music? Or, was that just a lens that you saw it through, or did it become an interest later on?
Much later on. History was my most hated subject in school. And also probably, sorry, Dr. Cowan, probably also my most hated subject in college. And music history, specifically, because those books are really dry. And it wasn't until like the late 90s I had an interest in genealogy, and I wanted to figure out for sure where my last name came from, and to clear up some of the rumors about what was in my family's bloodlines, my dad's in particular, because my mother's side had been tracked, or at least half of my mother's side had been tracked very diligently and deeply, but nothing on my mom's or my dad's side. And so I was learning about who my great grandfather was and my great great grandfather was, and of course not knowing my grandfather at all because he had passed away when my father was about 6 years old. So knowing none of that family history and having no one to ask. So I went to books and online records. Ancestry was coming on, and other family tree software was coming online so that you could really create it pretty easily, much better than the old paper forms that preceded that. And census records were coming online as well. So long story, sorry. And I was able to find out the name of my grandfather or great great grandfather. Sorry about that. And when he was born, and I realized that, hey, my great great grandfather was born a couple of years before Mozart. Well, that's weird. Mozart seemed in music history class to be so far away and so totally unrelated to who I was as a musician and the kind of music I liked to play and the things that influenced me. They seemed very 100% totally unrelated. And then I find out that my great great grandfather precedes him, and my great great grandfather doesn't seem so very far away. And so that was really a turning point for how I viewed the last couple centuries of music, for sure.
So you said that, typical music history textbooks are pretty dry, and I actually regret the fact that I never got to take a music history class in college. I didn't study music, but as a perpetual student myself, I would have loved to do that. But I can see where you're coming from. It gets a little bit, it gets textbooky. There's not a lot of human element in that. And it sort of sounds like that's what you were trying to inject into it, was maybe this personal thread. Now, I was expecting you maybe to say that you found out that your great-great-grandfather was like a musician himself, or he left some kind of record behind. But how did you sort of take it from the personal side of things and then turn it into what you do now, which is essentially having a personal collection of drums and percussion equipment from the 1880s?
Oh, two ways. Just understanding the timeline of what happened in history, especially in the area where my great great grandfather lived and raised his family, and understanding that Gilbert and Sullivan's comic operas were kind of were premiering in Tennessee during his lifetime. And to think that, he probably didn't, but he could have gone to see the performance. And just, pondering that was interesting. Even if it never happened, the fact that they were on similar timelines in the same region of the United States was kind of interesting. But my interest in some of the older music actually comes from the fact that I wanted to start a big band, and it's expensive to start a big band from scratch. You have to have a library of music to go along with that band. And I was thinking, it's probably going to take a catalog of at least 200 songs to really have a good enough variety and the right kinds of music and have requests and things like that. Well, I went online and I purchased a couple of individual songs, and what I was buying was actually from the 1920s and sometimes the 19-teens. And I bought an entire library of music from an estate, a guy named Lou Picchiotti. I'm grateful to Lou. He collected a great library of old dance band music and performed it himself as his career for a very long time. And not that I know Lou, but I know Lou's library of music. It came to me, and it gets to live on. And I think that personal connection, again, it comes back to the people who are threaded through that history. It's like every time I think of that music, I think of Lou, even though I never met him. And a great story, his granddaughter, who was chatting with the mother, said, "I think this is the first time Grandpa's music has ever made any money." She might be right. You know, it's hard to tell.
That's pretty cool though, because a lot of people, I don't know, I think a lot of people tend to look at history like we hold it up as this thing that's extremely important because it teaches us lessons that we could have never learned in the modern world until something has passed and you've had time to let it sit and kind of marinate and learn from it. But yet history gets a bad rap too, because it seems like people innately view the past like it was just bad or worse somehow, that progress always moves forward, And right. That's why I find it really fascinating that you've really dedicated a lot of your time and your bandwidth to singing the praises of all these old instruments and the older music and stuff. And like, I played in a lot of jazz bands and I love that style of music. It's timeless to me, even though it might harken back to a certain era. So right. Why is that time period, I guess, I mean, aside from the fact that you traced your history back to your great-great-grandfather, but like sonically, why is that era of music really yours to keep and to play? What makes you love the 20s stuff?
Well, it isn't so much that as I was to come to learn what was happening in the drum set at that time. So all of that old sheet music from the 20s, the drum parts are written either as quarter notes, just quarter notes in the snare drum and the bass drum, and that's it. That's the whole part. Or it's written as if it was 5-stroke rolls and it looks like a march.
Okay.
And it was so perplexing to me. It doesn't have the typical jazz spangalang pattern. It doesn't show a ride cymbal. It doesn't show a hi-hat because a hi-hat hadn't really been invented yet. It's missing so much, and I knew that I had to be missing something in the interpretation of this music. I knew that I wasn't doing it right. I knew that somebody had the answer, right? It wasn't me, that's for sure. And for a year and a half, I was searching and searching, asking everybody I know, who can teach me how to interpret this music properly? And a year and a half, nobody knew. And but in the meanwhile, I was collecting all sorts of old drums to try to, to learn, to have the physical artifact of that connection. Since I couldn't find the people to make that connection, I was finding the artifacts and finding old photos and finding the oldest books on jazz arranging and music and dictionaries and catalogs and method books from that time, and using every tool that I could, everything I could see, everything I could read, to try to make that connection again, to try to thread that needle and to try to make that personal jump from the world that I knew to the world that I knew was sitting there somewhere. Somebody had the secret, and it turns out that for me, Daniel Glass had the secret.
Okay, so that's how that connection started, I guess.
Yeah, he had created. I didn't know Daniel's playing, didn't know his name, but I was on Amazon searching for old method book, drum method book, I think is probably what I put in the search. And down in the recommendations, it said, people who viewed this also viewed. It was Daniel Glass's Century Project. And I'm reading the description. It's like, well, I don't know who this guy is, but the video, the way it's described, this kind of everything I want to learn. so so he, as it turns out, had those exact same questions that I did just 20 years earlier.
Okay.
And he had the answer. So he was the guy I was looking for this whole time.
That's wild.
Yeah,
Like
it is.
You kind of just time traveled to. He was the guy for you, like National Treasure, like looking for the last document you needed to complete your part of the puzzle.
Right. Yeah. So and I'm not sure that that's exactly answered your question, but it's that thread that gets me to the place where then I can start to expand what I know and then be able to share that with others. I'm drawn to that time frame because we don't know enough about it, because there are so many questions and so few answers. It's at that part of time that's just before jazz started becoming popular. It kind of encompasses some of ragtime, what was happening then, what was happening before then, what was the popular music and what was making people move, and who were those people. And I'm lucky that I've got the drums that belong to some of those people that were playing that style of music, or that were playing military community bands and things like that. And it's just so fascinating, because even though it's not my history, I feel like they're the owners of the drums that I've collected, and the owners of the books, that they have become a part of me, and they're definitely a part of the story of the instruments that they left behind. And those instruments were important enough to them that they kept them. They didn't end up in a fire pit. They didn't end up, somewhere that and the importance that those instruments had to themselves was understood and conveyed in some way to their families, who also kept them long after the owner died.
Right. I think this is pretty amazing, because in the 42 episodes I've done, I've maybe never had a guest so poignantly actually sum up the subtitle of my podcast, which is like, I called it Tapestry because it's supposed to be about music being a thread that connects, like it's just something that weaves throughout our lives. And I always was like, that's kind of my corny little tagline, but I mean, in the scope of history, music is a thread that connects people from time period to time period. And people 40 or 50 years from now are going to hopefully be looking at our drums, if they haven't rotted or something, or gotten blown up in a nuclear holocaust. I mean, people in the future are going to be looking at our stuff now, and hopefully in the same way. But I now have to ask then, what would you say is the most, I guess, shocking fact about the evolution of drums from the pre-modern era? Or is there just like anything you learned in that process that just made you go, whoa, holy crap?
Yes, there is, but I can't talk about it.
Okay. I will have to read the book to find out. So let's talk about the book. I'm guessing that is The Postcard Project, A Snapshot of Drumming Life with Daniel Glass, correct? Okay.
Correct.
So once you found Daniel Glass and he was your missing piece of the puzzle, how did you start a relationship with him, and like how did you two start to help each other out?
Well, I had learned about some grant money that was available in my region, and put together a project. I thought I would like to use that money to bolster my skills so that I can get to the next level of my own journey. And so I reached out to him, and I called him up, and I said, I'd like to consider this grant and having you as a part of it, as my mentor. And so we talked on the phone, and kind of arranged what it was that how he could help me best, and how to frame this so that the grant would be accepted by the grant agency, and just really strategized on what it was I wanted to learn, and the missing pieces in my own education as a drummer. and really learning how to interpret and to perform that music from the 1920s and do it authentically and do it with the right kind of instruments. And it's that's where the relationship started. Was, after seeing the Century Project and just being so in awe. And I remember our conversation because at that time I had already been collecting old instruments, so I was doing that prior to meeting him, instruments and photos and books and the music and everything. And we were talking and I said, blah, 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 we're talking, chat. And I said, yeah, and I've got this overhang pedal. And he says, you've got an overhang pedal? In that moment, I knew I was instantly cool and, right? But if nothing else cinched it, that sure did. So,
I mean, it's a pretty niche interest, but I guess once you find your people, you find your people, and that's,
Yeah, and there are so few in relation to the grander scheme of drumming, and but boy, they are really coming out of the woodwork now, and there are I'm acquainted with a lot of people who have this fantastic knowledge of very specific segments of drumming history. So one who's an expert on rope drums of the Civil War and colonial time frame. Another one who is an expert at Prussian drums, Prussian style. And another one who's an expert at the drums that were built around World War II when the government asked the drum manufacturers to reduce the amount of metal that they were using to build drum sets. So, so everybody kind of has their own little special area of interest. And I leave the ropes alone.
Not your thing.
It's like that's a whole nother world and a whole different education on the history of drums. I have a grand respect for it, and I hope to find something like that at some point. But that sweet spot for me is the late 1800s and the early 1900s.
Have you ever considered setting up a museum for your own collection?
Yeah, actually, I have. So I'm trying to figure out, the time that it makes sense to do that. And actually, with the book coming out, I think that's a really great opportunity to be able to share that at the same time. So to have not only a photo of someone in a drum, using a drum and in a live setting back in the day, but then also having an exemplar, a real live, you can see it and feel it example of what they were playing on at that time. So I've got this wild collection of bass drum beaters and like hand beaters and also foot pedals and the little trap instruments that they would have used back in that day. And it's a fascinating collection that really that kind of gets bigger every couple of weeks. It's kind of like perpetual Christmas at my house, but
well, it's like having a partner who plays guitar. There's always a justification for them to come home with another guitar. So I wouldn't feel too bad. Right before you signed on, I was actually rewatching some of your videos about the cymbal series, and I thought it was so cool, but also so funny to see like how through each video, it was obvious they were trying to solve a problem. They're like, okay, how do we make one percussionist be able to do 2 or 3 things? Because the modern drum set, as we know it, is like octopus arms. You're doing a million different things. Whereas back in the time period you're studying, it's like, how about we take this cymbal and put it on this guy's shoe? That helps. There's a limb we haven't been, exploiting well enough. So I found that really interesting, but it's also kind of like primitive too, just seeing some of the inventions they came up with. Like, is there a particular instrument from that time period that you just have like a certain affinity for, or you have a favorite?
Well, I'm not sure that I have exactly a favorite, but I am always amazed at the ingenuity that they had. 2 of my Prussian style drums they automatically come with a hook that would go into a sling or into your belt or whatever, and a little fold down knee stand.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, that's really pretty clever. And it's just such a primitive version of what we find on modern marching drums today, you know. But it's so cool. It's like that took some thinking, and it goes back, to a time when people really had to be much more self-sufficient with their machinery. They were farmers, and you probably had to build your replacement part on whatever it is that broke down from your farm equipment, or if you owned a sawmill or whatever, you probably were making, or you had a blacksmith in your area that was going to make something for you. And so one of my favorite pieces, again, it's one of the most primitive things. It is a mount that mounts onto your bass drum counter hoop, and it is made to hold a cymbal. But that thing is heavy. It's made of wrought iron that was clearly hand hammered. It is so thick. It is so robust. The threads in it were hand threaded. It's very clear to see that. And it is so amazing all at the same time.
Is that
to think how things have been refined along the way, and to have this literally a timeline of how that happened, and it became so polished and so utilitarian at the same time. But this piece, it gets the job done too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting point, like thinking that pre-globalization, you would have to go down the street and find the guy who could use his lathe or his anvil or something to make you the piece. And now in 2020, we leave a nasty Google review if Sabian ships us our cymbal and it doesn't have a felt with it because it was supposed to come with it. Like, things have really changed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, instead of having to make your own felt.
Right, yeah, our expectations have kind of changed. Now, I guess in that sense, what are some skills you need to be a good historian and restorer? Or have you just sort of learned along the way?
A little bit of both. I think some of it is natural, and that would be I've got this weird ability to really dig into the finest detail of stuff. I miss the picture, totally miss the big picture, but small detail, I am king, absolutely. And for me, I guess that's an important part of the way that I research. I can find the smallest detail, and I think of things differently too. So I might be looking in a historical newspaper, and I really want to learn about bass drum pedals and the history of bass drum pedals. But when at that time, they really didn't think about it that way, so they called them bass drum beaters, or drum beaters, or automatic beaters, because that was a thing. Prior to that, it was not automatic. It was a mallet, a beater in your hand, and that was your bass drum beater.
True.
And so you have to kind of take the etymology. You have to think about how they thought about things, because our modern terminology is not the same as what they used.
Yeah, you can't just superimpose modern ideas onto non-modern machinery, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So thinking about the distinction between when you're when you're holding a drum head and you've got the hoop of the drum head, right? We don't call that a flesh hoop very much anymore, because because our drum heads are made of mylar. You have to put yourself back in that place and use their terminology when you're looking in the newspapers from that era, or magazines or catalogs from that era. You just have to take that step back, and I think that is one way that I've got a benefit, is that I'm creative in the way that I do my searches, and with that I get interesting results.
Interesting results. That being said, what are some challenges that you've faced trying to kind of promote your craft and like, you know, also weave it into the fact that you're also in the present era, you're also a performing musician yourself. So would have been some roadblocks there.
Oh, I have had challenges finding local people sometimes where I can learn from. So I really have to seek people out. They're oftentimes far away. Thank goodness for things like Skype and FaceTime and things like that. Sometimes just not having access, not knowing that there is a source of information that has exactly the information that you need to learn, you know, like a catalog or a book that somebody's written, but it was written in Italian and you're not there.
Yeah.
You know, you might, and you just don't know that it exists yet. Those answers are all out there somewhere, or is in somebody's diary, but you don't know who that person might be, and they don't know that what they have is amazingly valuable to someone like me who is interested in it. It's just grandpa's diary and great grandpa's diary or great grandma's diary for that matter. You know, there were plenty of women players as the photos that I've got bear out. But I think they just weren't important enough to be documented. So their stories are out there, and it's the work to find them.
Right. I guess because of the unfortunate, you know, either misogyny or just lack of placing importance on female drummers then, and maybe even a little bit now. I mean, history, unfortunately, only captures what those of the era at the time felt was important to capture and document. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that's got to be pretty tough. Well, let's go into the present now then, and there's plenty of other things I can ask you just about your involvement in, you know, not to mention like being supportive of female drummers. But I know right before this you were doing some stuff with the Hit Like a Girl contest, right?
Correct.
So tell me a little bit about that, because I know that maybe some of my listeners might be familiar with what that is, but to be honest, I don't really know a whole lot about it, and I feel like I should. So.
All right. Well, it is a contest that was started a few years back. I don't even know the origins of the contest, and I'm ashamed that I don't know that. But it is a way for girl and women drummers to have a place where they can enter videos that are reviewed by a panel of judges. They get feedback back on that. There are weekly winners. There's overall winners. There are some really high-end musicians who are a part of the contest and a part of that judging procedure. And I'm just lucky enough to be able to participate. This was my third year of performing, or not performing, but performing as a judge, performing in the capacity as a judge. And it's been a great learning experience. It's been great to see and be supportive of, and see other women be supportive of the people who have entered the contest. And just a wonderful experience, I think.
Yeah.
Does that tell you enough, or what other questions do you have?
No, that's great. I mean, I just wasn't sure sort of what the end result is, other than, you know, obviously the spreading around on social media and just the exposure, plus getting to say, you know, as a young, or maybe not young, because I know they have different age groups, just getting to put on your personal portfolio, your website, like, oh, I won the Hit Like a Girl contest this year. And, you know, I know for some percussionists that might really have a lot of importance to them, just being able to say that they won that contest. I mean, there's definitely a huge variety of styles represented too, because I have seen some of the videos. Absolutely. And like, I know one of my favorite drummers is Annika Nils, and the fact that she's part of the panel for that is just so spectacular. And it's cool that over the past few years, I think we've really seen a boost in just women being less afraid to play what is traditionally a male instrument.
I'd agree. Yeah. And like I say, I don't think it's so much that it's a male instrument as much as it just wasn't documented that it was a female instrument.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important distinction to make. We all think of it in that way. It's easier to think of it that way as to challenge it and go, no, it was an everybody instrument.
But no, that's a good philosophy. What would you say then are some of the challenges that I guess women in the percussive arts are still facing today?
I think that the old mindset, there are still traces of that. I think, though, there are great strides being made in being inclusive, and I find that it is going both ways with the younger kids, especially who I see who are signing up for band. There are boys going in for flute, and which when I was in band in school, there were no boys in the flute section. There were a couple of boys in the clarinet section, right? Because it was always considered a girl instrument.
Right. Just
right?
a needlessly gendered thing, really, for like zero reason.
Absolutely. And it is always just a little bit frustrating, when to me, when I hear somebody say, oh, look, it's a girl drummer or a female drummer, it's like you would never say, oh, look, it's a boy trumpet player.
Right.
Nobody and no man, right, would stand to be called a boy at that rate either.
It's true. I do struggle with that because it's like you want to highlight female artists, but then it's also like, okay, I'm not special. I'm not special because of what I am or who I am.
No,
I just want to be viewed with the same list of qualifications that you are, regardless of if you're a guy, basically.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't take kindly to any kind of label, I guess. Really, I'm just a drummer, and I can be good for that music that I'm playing, or not the best choice for the music that I'm playing, or as anybody might be a good or better or best choice for that style or for this style, for that style. I'm just a drummer. Let me drum. I'm a percussionist. Let me percuss as well, please.
I was digging into your website a little bit, and I pulled out something that I thought was really cool, and I wanted to ask you about it because it kind of goes along with this topic. But I believe you had auditioned for Cirque du Soleil at some point, and
I did.
Yeah, and you had written a blog entry about how that experience totally revolutionized the way that you had to practice just as a musician. So as a drummer who is very bad at practicing, or at least practicing effectively, what was your takeaway from that experience, and how did it improve your level of professionalism as a musician?
Well, I was so set on doing well and representing myself well for that. I was practicing anywhere between 7 and 10 hours a day to prepare for that. And there has never been a time in my lifetime where I have practiced 7 to 10 hours a day. It was so that particular music for that particular show was wonderfully demanding. It was the most physically challenging music I've had to play, where you really need to be on your game. There's fast fills, fast tempo. You really have to be thinking on your feet, and you have to be soloing for extended sections of time, 8 measures or 16 measures, and you've got to be spot on. And there were a lot of things in my playing that I needed to slow down and really work out. So I would take the music that I was given, and I do this with anything that I'm doing. I've got music right now that I'm taking down and reducing the tempo by 30%. So I've got a challenge or an opportunity to meet that challenge, and to give myself the time to build the skill slowly and deliberately and effectively and efficiently, instead of because what I hate to do is to learn something poorly, and then you have to unlearn how to do that something poorly, and then you have to relearn how to do it right. So you have to do 3 things in order to learn it right, instead of just taking the time and doing it right the first time. Then you just have to learn it once.
Oh, that's why have I never thought of it like that? That's so duh. Like, of course, that's how you should practice, but just hearing you say
Mhm.
it kind of makes me go, all right, yeah, maybe you should practice that way. But
Right. So what hasn't been a part of my music performing history has been progressive rock.
ah, shame. No.
It's just not a yeah, it's just not a part of what I did. I was, I love driving a big band, and I play, marimba and vibraphone and all of those things, as well as drum set. And it just wasn't a part of my performing experience. And so I'm in a grant project right now where I am learning how to do that, and how to add those elements into my current list of abilities. So I'm choosing a Dream Theater piece because,
Oh, which one?
Fatal Tragedy is the
Oh
song that I
man.
am in the process of learning. And it's got a few challenges in it. It's an
Yes.
understatement of the year for somebody like me who has never really done much listening in that particular style of music. So there again, that's an example where I am learning how to play double bass drum. Essentially, I had to learn how to play just a smattering of it for the Cirque du Soleil audition.
Hmm.
But in this particular grant project, I'm full on double bass drumming, and yeah, and so I'm taking my music at 30%, at a 30% discount, 35% discount, just to be able to build that skill slowly, properly, so that when I get it up to tempo here in the next month, that I can be a champ at it.
Oh,
So I want to be a champ at it.
that is a really lofty goal to become Mike Portnoy in a matter of a month. I mean, but
Yeah, it
you
is.
know, still though, I mean that's impressive though, and I guess I'm glad you mentioned that because a lot of my interviews, I mean, prog stuff is like what I love, but I find myself coming up against music and in a bad way, sort of trying to judge it based on how technical it is or how complex it is, and really at the end of the day those terms are kind of meaningless. Like if you can execute a swing song or a jazz song in a way that's evocative, and if you're following along with music and it's not improvising and you're doing it quote unquote correctly, then great. But I think needlessly complicating things for the sake of needlessly complicating them is something that maybe gets kind of lost in translation. But
Right,
you know
right, absolutely. So my goal in this project is not necessarily to be able to recreate his performance note for note, although it would be a great benefit if I could, right?
mhm.
But what I really need to do is to understand the underlying facets of that music, and to be able to convey in the style of, without necessarily just going note for note and missing out on the ability to interpret a different piece in that same style.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're kind of like learning what the vocabulary is so that you could speak it in other contexts, maybe.
Exactly, exactly. That's a better explanation than I ever could have come up with.
Well, thank you.
Because
Well,
again, I don't see the big picture, right? I just see the little minutia. So
yeah, well then, hey, if you're into little minutia, then prog rock is the right genre for you because it's not a song until you have 12 different splash cymbals of varying sizes.
yes, that is
But
that is absolutely a fact. For that, I'll tell you a little bit about the drum set that I'm using, both for the Cirque du Soleil audition and for my learning of this style. I have a 10-piece Tama set,
jealous.
and yeah, which is great. It's got 4 rack toms, 3 floor toms, 2 snare drums, just a single bass drum, but double pedal. And then, pretty much cymbals to match. They are everywhere. And and as I like to say, you find your expert. Whatever it is you want to learn, find your expert. So I've got an expert in my queue of people to call up this month, and just to get strategies on how to effectively put that many cymbals up and be able to reach them all. It's like, what's
It's an ergonomic problem.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, what is my best option? And, I think it is trickier, the shorter in stature that you are. So if somebody has an extra 6 feet or 6 inches of height on me, I'm not short by any means, but if you've got an extra 6 inches and longer arms, you've got much more range, and many more places in order to put that stuff and keep it in reach.
Right. I've been there. I mean, I feel like as a drummer, your setup and your style is constantly evolving as you gather equipment to match your tastes, and that's been one of the biggest hangups in me learning drums, is just figuring out where I want things. Why do I want things here? Is this helping me? Is this hindering me? Blah, blah, blah. I could go on about that for hours, but let me ask you then about some of the other music you've actually gotten to perform on in the last year or so. I know you mentioned that Waltzing on Waves album, and I listened to a track or two, and I guess you could kind of describe that as maybe a cabaret, swing, folk sort of piece. I don't know. I mean,
the composer and singer, guitarist, pianist on who comprises Waltzing on Waves. She is she has such a beautiful vision and this classically trained voice, which she has obvious mastery of. She is an amazing singer, and she takes inspiration from very real things that are a part of her life and a part of her experience, and then and luckily hired me as one of the drummers and percussionists on her first release.
How did you become involved in that project? I mean, I know that artist is in the Twin Cities area, and I think you're close by, but how did you develop that relationship and become a session artist for that?
She had been asking around town for the names of women drummers and percussionists. She was specifically wanting to create her first release with, I think she was looking to target about 70% women as performers. And so she was asking around with the people who she respected in the Twin Cities, and one of the persons she asked was another local artist, Annie Mack. And Annie is this gritty, honest, open, real blues singer, and I had performed one time with her. But based on that one time, I came prepared for the show. We had no rehearsal whatsoever. I knew her music. I knew how to play her 2 hours of her show without a problem, with the most minor of hiccups, and was just me for that performance. And she loved it and loved working with me and loved the fact that I was so prepared for her.
That's impressive, honestly. That kind of, I was going to ask you about the paddle wheeler gig, but it just came to mind based on what you just said. How, what is the most important part for you about being a musician? And I guess what's the thing that you really feel it takes to be a professional musician?
I would say preparation is, it's two things. It's preparation, and it's the ability to hang with people.
Cool, I got one of those.
If you are a pain in somebody's behind, somebody who's a lesser player is probably, but easy to get along with, is probably going to have that gig, and not you. That's it. But for me, it's the ability to prepare to the best of my, to the best that I can, to the best level that I can come and be ready to play for you, no matter who you are, no matter what your music is. I'm gonna get everything in advance that I can, and I'm going to chart it in a way that makes sense for me, and I'm going to do my best. And And that's all you can ask, is for anybody to do their best and not be a jerk.
Yeah, and not be a jerk. I think, again, like thinking about how I met you through the Drummer Girls United group, I see a lot of posts in that group about women starting to learn drums, and they get really overwhelmed by reading sheet music. And I'm one of them too. I'm just still now learning to read drum sheet music, even though I play wind instruments and can read wind sheet music fine. But I think a lot of people discount the fact that just because there's a system for learning music that's widely spread, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be your system, and that if you need to write things down for a gig or use your own shorthand or vocabulary, that's perfectly valid too. And so that's pretty central, I guess, to your philosophy as a teacher and learner.
Yeah, every kind of music, I think, has a system that works best for that kind of music, and every musician has a kind of system that works best for them. They're not always the same, but no matter what situation you are in, it always helps to have a common language between you and the person you need to communicate with.
Right.
And I think that's a real critical point. So for me, when I'm trying to learn a tune, when I was learning Annie's tunes, when I was learning Jen Bloom's tunes, that's Waltzing on Waves, when I was preparing for the Smoky Mountain Opry, some of that music was prepared for me, but some parts I made up on my own, and so it really depends on the music, but that I'm playing, but. For many of those, my primary tool is three-ring or three-hole punched notebook paper. that is
old school.
That is how old school. That is how I do my charting, and I use a method where instead of writing a full staff, I just use 2 lines. Oh. So above the line, the top line is hands, the bottom line is feet. Above the line is your right hand, below the line is your left hand. Above the line, the lower line is your right foot, below the line is your left foot. So hi-hat, if you're going to have a hi-hat chick, it's going to be an X below the bottom line. And it's so easy because you can find notebook paper everywhere. Right. You cannot find manuscript paper everywhere. Although, that's easier when you can, print your own, but that didn't used to be the situation. You'd have to rely on a music store being open. So, I've eliminated the problem of not finding anything. And if I to write on, and if I have to, I can just take a piece of paper and draw 2 lines. That's simple enough.
That might be game changing for me, because I'm trying to think of like how I attempt to transcribe and then I just get frustrated and give up. I'm like, I'll just learn it by ear. But that's not. It doesn't help me understand rhythmically what's going on, and so I can't be afraid of not having a tool to speak the language with. You just have to find something that works for you, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm going to ease into the last couple of questions here, but I didn't want to forget to bring up your current job, which is doing some stuff on this paddle wheel tour. And I know when we initially spoke over Zoom, it was, right as all the coronavirus restrictions were happening, and you're like, well, I just got a job and then I just lost that job basically because everything's delayed.
It's being held. So thank goodness it's not gone. But I got this tremendous opportunity to essentially be a historian on a Mississippi River paddle wheeler. And in addition to that, I'll be running some sound and lights. And the best thing is I get to have my own library, right? So there's a library too, actually, aboard this vessel, which is the American Countess. It is so new that it hasn't even had its christening or inaugural voyage yet. And so that's exciting too, just to be a part of that. But I will be, my primary duty is to be a historian and talking about the river to the passengers on this paddle wheeler. And I love the fact that I'm going to get to incorporate not only my family's personal connection with the river, my connection with the river, Um, but I'll also get to incorporate the wonderful things about how music traveled up and down the river on the paddle boats. From the first time a paddle wheeler was on the Mississippi, which was in 1814, and to think about how many musicians and traditions moved from place to place using that particular form of transportation. And so it's just fascinating the way that the way that my musical understanding is going to expand through the process of creating some of these presentations is something that I really look forward to.
Plus, you get to be in a different place every night, I think. I think you were saying to me that, you'll get to maybe have like a free day off or something in one of the towns or cities you stop in. But what's kind of the touring span of that again?
Each of the trips is a week long. So it might go from New Orleans to Memphis, or Memphis to St. Louis to St. Paul, or from, I think, St. Louis to Louisville, Kentucky, and Louisville to Pittsburgh. So there's it's mostly the Mississippi for me, and a little bit down the Ohio River, and it's in little chunks of time where I'm going to be home as much as I'm going to be on the water. So that's great too. I don't have to stop my home, my home area performing. I get to still play with Waltzing on Waves and with Annie Mac and with other people who invite me to be their drummer du jour.
That sounds ideal, though, really, like for a performing musician.
It really is, yeah. Wow. It's a beautiful thing. I get to have all these adventures, and I get to, for the port cities where we stop. So in between New Orleans and Memphis, there's Natchez, Mississippi, St. Francisville, which has a beautiful plantation, and in it, with that opportunity, it's like you think, oh, it's a plantation. Well, no, it's an opportunity to learn about how music infiltrated the lives of the people who worked and lived on that plantation, and how that tradition then grew and expanded. And so I have yet to learn all of those things. I'm still in the investigation phase.
Yeah.
And the intake phase.
I know that if everything does go to plan and life kind of resumes to normal, that is like so up my alley. It's just I will happily go geek out at your presentation and learn stuff. But yeah, I'm glad that we mentioned that. So that's really exciting. Well, I have a couple concluding things to mention, but I guess before I ask the last few things, are there any other projects that you're working on right now that you just want to mention before, we run out of time, I guess?
Oh, I'm sure, because yes, in fact, I can't mention it. It's one of those things again where I can't say anything, but I can say that I have learned that I was awarded a fellowship. I haven't actually received the formal notification, but they were asking for some information for the publicity for this. So I wish I could say something about it. I'm not able to really say much more than that. I've got another project, again, where I am not able yet to divulge. It's not my project to divulge, but I've gotten an invitation to work on a very interesting museum project. So we'll see how that all pans out. Yeah. And then I had the best email this week from a fellow just out of the blue. He had been doing some research online and found my symbol series, the Back in Time symbol series, and he writes to me and he says, I'm a retired architect and sculptor, and I'd like to know if you'd like to help me work on this idea I've got. So it's like, how interesting is that,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. And again, the only answer is yes. Right.
I was just going to say, I said that's a perfect cap to this interview, I think, is just, what's the one thing you've learned? Well, always say yes.
Yeah, that and the other thing that for me is just a critical piece in all of this is find your expert.
always say yes, find your expert. That does answer my next question, which was going to be, what's the best advice you can give? But I think you've given it in bounds, you know? Well,
find your expert, because that's where the cool stuff is.
You never know who's going to end up an expert too. Like, we seem to think that experts are only people who have like these crazy high paying jobs and that they're, you know, building amazing things or they're finding the cure for cancer or something, but your neighbor might be an expert in something and you would just have absolutely no clue until you talk to them, I guess. So
right.
It's kind of exciting. Well, Kelli, since you've listened to one of my episodes, you might know what I'm going to ask you next, but if you're prepared or not, too bad. So my last question for you then is, if you could only listen to 3 albums for the rest of your life, what would they be and why?
Oh, yeah. You know, the number one answer is Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's just got so many different things in it. The first guitar solo I ever learned was in Fixing a Hole, so that was great. It's a wonderful, just kooky guitar solo. It's awesome. It doesn't fit the norm of guitar solos. It's so oddly tonal, not badly tonal, but just it chooses musical tones that you don't normally hear together, if that makes sense, and strings them all together in the most wonderful of ways. And I love that whole album. Boy, the next 2, that's tricky, and probably not. And again, the way that I think about things is not as this overall view, but more like little chunks out of it. So I think for me, I would have trouble selecting an album. It would be more like I would want to be able to hear the tambourine roll in Madonna's song "Cherish."
Okay, that's a valid answer.
And I would like, you know, I mean, it's like it's a weird answer. I would like to be able to hear the backbeat of Chris Layton in virtually any Stevie Ray Vaughan song. I would love to hear the hi-hat that Stuart Copeland has in all of his work with the Police. That hi-hat is awesome.
Nobody's ever answered that way for me, but I love it. Like, honestly.
Yeah. So, like I say, for me, it is really less about the artist or the release. It is really about those very small elements that are a big part of that. And that's just really not the question that you asked, but I'm afraid that that's the best answer I've got.
It's fine, because I might switch it up depending on my guess. I might just ask, what are your 3 favorite musical moments? Because, you know, I'm biased as an album listener. I like to listen to albums instead of thinking, like, if someone who isn't an album listener says to me, oh, what, you know, did you really like that guitar solo on that track? Chances are I won't even know what song they're talking about. Like, I just don't think in tracks. I think in albums, but it's always cool to find someone who thinks entirely opposite from me in that regard, because it's just another way people experience music. So that's perfect.
To add to that list of things that I can't give you a list of, the tone, it's just the pitch quality of Stevie Wonder's harmonica. And it's in the inflection of, I mean, that's a killer thing right there for me. So I guess we're gonna have to put some Stevie Wonder on the list of 3 albums I would do. Can I use a greatest hits compilation as one of my albums?
Yes. I think I've had someone answer like Jimi Hendrix's greatest hits. I'm like, Zach, that's cheating. He's like, no, you said favorite album. I said, okay, fine.
That's right.
Fine.
It exists.
Yeah, it's out there. Well, wow, this has been a really fascinating interview, and I'm so grateful that you took time out of your weekend to just talk at me, because, you know, it was such a chance encounter, honestly.
It was, but that's why I say yes.
Perfect way to end it. Say yes. That's the philosophy, everyone. Say yes. But yeah.
Say yes.
Say yes.
Don't be afraid. Don't think that that the person who you're saying yes to, maybe your yes is just going up to have a conversation with someone. And you're psyched out. You think, oh, they're never going to talk with me. Guess what? They probably are.
Absolutely.
They probably are. So don't say no to yourself before they've got a chance to say no to you. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this today. It's
Sure.
Awesome. I always love having an opportunity just to talk with people, and it makes me think about what it is that I think about, and why I'm thinking those weird things that I'm thinking. So.
Oh, it's relatable. So, all right. Well, thanks, Kelli. Thanks for sharing your time, and I'll just hopefully see you on a paddle boat in a couple months from now. So. Hopefully everybody can get out and see Kelli on a paddle boat just like me. If you can't get to a paddle boat anytime soon, or if coronavirus prevents us from doing so for a little while longer, you should go check out her stuff on all of the places you can find her online. If you go to her website, that is www.kelliraetubbs.com. That's spelled KelliRaeTubbs. KelliRaeTubbs.com. She's also on YouTube under Kelli Rae Tubbs, Twitter at Kelli Rae Tubbs, and on Facebook as Kelli Rae Tubbs Drums. She has a fantastic educational series on her YouTube channel, and honestly, as you could tell throughout this interview, if you're a fan of history and you're a fan of music, particularly drums, she has some really, really great content up there, so please go check it out. And as always, thanks for listening.